Hi everyone, this is Isabel Milan, and I will be guiding you through a discussion of the challenges facing higher education and focusing in on the ultimate issue of the lack of funding and how that surrounds many other issues following it. We must first define what school funding is, and in this sense, I say how money is allocated. We want to note that money is allocated through districts, zones, and individuals. This may be through individualized programs that help disabled, different language individuals, and much more. Different districts like low income, higher income, and zones of higher property taxes, and more. Noting the divisions between federal, state, and local funding, we want to note that 48% of funding comes from income taxes, sales taxes, and fees. 44% comes from property taxes, and 8% comes from the federal government. I wanted to key in on how 44% comes from property taxes because we see the true division between higher income and lower income neighborhoods having different affordances when it comes to financing and funding for schools. And then again, we're seeing the lack and the very minimal support that federal government is giving. As I leave off with the minimal contributions that federal government has made, we have to see ways in which the federal government can take a greater part in giving resources and better programs to individuals who are in need. We also want to key in on research that shows that different funding can range from all the way from 6,000 per student to 18,000. We see this huge difference in between different areas and different income areas, and we see the true division that is created by funding. And then we also want to see how certain programs receive more money highlighted by federal policies, like certain programs that I mentioned again, like for different language students, for different abled students, and more. Okay, now we want to guide into the possibilities that come with adequate school funding for higher education. We see that research shows that adequate school funding for higher education was noted to narrow the achievement gap for high poverty schools, areas that do not have as much income and as much resources, and it also works greatly to create an equitable, equitable education experience for all. We want to know why we're saying all because equitable is not reaching just certain students, not just affluent students, but reaching more so students who are in true need of better education, which are low income students. And then we want to see that adequate school funding ultimately can help at-risk students. We want students to remain in school, and providing more funding for kids who are in need and true need outside of school and inside of school, we're helping them to remain in schools, and we're lowering the dropout rate increasingly. And then we want to see how it creates better informed and more socially aware citizens. Again, as I explained, that funding ultimately creates more opportunities for students to be more socially aware because they're given opportunities outside of school, like through volunteering options, through field trips, and more to create a better informed education that is not just within the classroom. Adequate school funding has also been proven to have an increase in adulthood earnings, especially when it comes to higher education. Students who are going into higher education, who are given the funds to go through higher education, ultimately have better paying jobs once they come out of school. And then we want to see how higher quality teachers in schools that need it most. We want to see how that is higher needs is really needed, like high quality teachers in areas that do not have it. I understand, like from my own experience, that I didn't come from either the best schools coming from elementary, but my middle and high school gave me great opportunities, and we want teachers who reflect the education that is going on in schools. And then we see a huge positive in adequate school funding as we see lower rates of incarceration. That's less money that is going to incarcerated people, and then we're creating a safer community and all. So the current impact of schooling funding can be defined in this manner that affluent districts receive more funding, and this is a true division that we're seeing. How I mentioned that property income, or property taxes are what divides these schools' resources, and ultimately it's leading to a sharp divide in people. And then we also not only see that divide, but we also see a rise in tuition and funding that is falling behind. This is noted by our class textbook that tuition continues to rise as funding fails to meet its end on rising as well when people are in true need. Less people are now going to college because of this issue. They're not being able to meet the financial qualification, the financial accessibility to get into schools, and ultimately that's leading to less people going into schools at this period, going into higher education like colleges, going into technical schools, going to universities, and more. And then we want to point in to how conflict theory is joined in with how school funding in higher education is not being met. And conflict theory proves that the funding plays a huge role in hindering social mobility, and it's creating more inequity when it comes to the division between lower income and higher income individuals, and higher income families and lower income families. And that shows us the ultimate effect of how funding is creating this division in itself, creating institutionalized oppression, institutionalized discrimination. And furthermore, this is not only advanced through the own institution's practices and the government's lack of funding, but it is instituted by the teachers' lack of diversity training, which needs to be funded more. And we're certainly finding that teachers are not meeting their end to create an equitable classroom environment, and they're not finding to meet the needs of a diverse population in the classroom, which is ultimately leading to people moving away from higher education. And then we also see, as I mentioned several times, the division between race and class, and how minorities um, create a huge population of lower income places, and that's ultimately what is seen as a division. And then again, functionalist perspective plays a great role in defining how school funding is lacking. And in that way, we see that the division is between, again, more affluent individuals, and it's keeping lower income people in the same constant cycle of having the same repetitive misses, the same limits, and the same barriers to higher education. From my personal experience, I want to guide you through the fact that I did not come from a hugely affluent family myself. I came from a single parent family, and we see how ultimately the family differences also play a huge role. And I was granted slight funding when it comes to FAFSA, great funding when it comes to Bright Futures, but I want to mention how this is again institutionalized because not everybody has the same resources. We see how society plays a huge role into creating these limits, creating these barriers, and creating different family lifestyles. We see that there's people and individuals not like myself. I never had to go to work after I had school. I was able to take my time, I was able to focus in, and I was able to get volunteer hours. I was able to work on getting my GPA as high as I could, and I was able to focus in on my testing scores and get my SAT as best as I could as well, which is not made possible for everybody, especially lower income and people in true need. And then we see how I was awarded many scholarships and private scholarships through Pam and Leslie Muma, who played a huge role into helping me. But again, that was only made possible through my partnership with Junior Achievement. And again, that was because I volunteered so much. I was able to take time off of school. I was able to get a ride to these certain events that my mom was able to take me to, and not everybody has the same access to transportation. Again, we're seeing this lack of funding to meet the ends of what is needed to create a more um, equitable access to even higher education that I was able to get. So I want to note some solutions for school funding. I wanted to note that teacher training and pay is a huge part. We're seeing that school funding is not only for the students, but it is for the teachers, it is for the institution itself in bettering programs, it is for individuals outside of school. We're not noting that this is only an issue from in school. We're not noting that it's only an issue to pay for tuition, to pay for books, but it's an issue outside. We're not affording the same opportunities and resources for people who are in need of transportation. Transportation also plays a huge role in being able to get to school. We're also seeing financial crisis beyond what is noted in school, which is the pandemic. A lot of people faced unemployment that made them unable to maybe make up the rest of what they needed to pay for tuition, or even for their own expenses, which causes them to move away from higher education, which is a true issue. And then we see the availability to reapply for issuances and processing of past assistance. We want to note that not everybody is able to get the same assistance, and we need to note that it should be on a need-based requirement, that there's people who are in need that may not come from low income or high income, but they are in true need of these assistances. And then we also want to note that community colleges need to be afforded more, because we have seen a substantial increase in the tuition for colleges, community colleges at that, which were set to be more accessible for lower income students, which are no longer that way. And then again, moving outside of the realm of just school to housing, childcare, and food for students that need to be funded. And then a call to action, again, is keying in on these aspects. We want to see that lower income students are benefited through more funding that is created just for them. We want to see that more training and programs are funded that teach teachers and staff and more to have an integrated diversity classroom and curriculum and teachings and accessibility. And then we want to create funding again beyond the classroom that contains food and housing needs. And then we want to work with close institutions to ensure the stability of work outside to again meet these necessary income. And then funding for training for equitable practices, like I mentioned, to promote minorities to graduate. We want more equitable education that reaches out to larger communities and diverse communities. And then in the end, this is all my references. Thank you.